They say even hell's got its own king. And in Red River Maximum Security Penitentiary, that king walked barefoot. First, you gotta understand something. Nobody ran that place. Not the guards, not the wardens, not the feds who showed up every couple of months pretending they were in control. Inside those walls, the only name that decided who ate, who slept, and who bled was Brock the Bulldog Malone. If you ever had the luck or the misfortune to step into that corridor, you knew exactly who he was. His body looked carved out of pure rage. His tattooed arms told stories not even the FBI had in their files, and his eyes, that stare, could make seasoned men shake like kids in their very first fight. That morning, like every morning, he strolled down the main hall while dozens of inmates shrank back into their cells. It was like watching a predator walk through a pen full of sheep. Nobody dared meet his eyes. Nobody dared break the silence. But that day, the air felt different. At the very last cell sat a new prisoner, and he wasn't shrinking back. He was on the cold floor, eyes closed, legs crossed, breathing slow, like he was sitting in some Buddhist temple instead of the most violent prison in America. His name was Kai Nakamura. Nobody really knew who he was. His rap sheet was nearly spotless. No gang ties, no tattoos, no heavy record. He'd been locked up after beating down a cop in a diner, circumstances still hazy. It felt like a clerical mistake had tossed him into America's darkest nightmare. But that wasn't what got under the other inmate's skin. It was his silence. The veterans mocked him, tested him, tried to provoke him. Kai didn't react, didn't smile, didn't complain, just watched. And in that prison, silence was more dangerous than any threat. By the second day, the Bulldog had had enough. He noticed how that rookie's presence was shifting the room. Even his own men, tattooed beasts, loyal like pit bulls, started whispering about the calm guy who didn't seem to know what fear was. When one inmate stopped to stare at Kai meditating, that was it. His cell was right next to the old supply room. No cameras, perfect spot to send a message. That morning, the Bulldog marched down the hall like a general. Rows of men he'd beaten, scarred and broken, cowered at his shadow. The silence was suffocating. He reached the last cell. Kai hadn't moved an inch, still seated, eyes closed, breathing steady. The door creaked open. The giant stepped inside. 2 henchmen blocked the way out. It was the same ritual as always. Either the new guy knelt or he got crushed. But Kai didn't move, didn't stand, didn't even open his eyes, just breathed, like the world outside didn't exist. The Bulldog stepped closer. "This ain't no meditation class, worm. Here, you either learn to survive or you end up part of the floor." Another step. He raised his arm, ready to grab the kid by the throat, and then the world flipped upside down. With one almost invisible move, Kai caught his wrist, spun with surgical precision, and slammed the Bulldog against his own cell wall. In seconds, the prison king was on the ground, pinned, his arm locked, spine twisted, Kai's knee digging into his chest. The henchmen froze. They had no idea what to do. It felt unreal, like a trick their eyes couldn't process. For the first time, Kai spoke. His voice was calm, steady. "I didn't come here to fight, but if someone forces me, I know how to defend myself." He let go, sat back down, crossed his legs, closed his eyes. The corridor went still, as if time itself had stopped. By that afternoon, the rumor had already turned into legend. The rookie had dropped the Bulldog and hadn't even broken a sweat. Some swore he was using moves straight out of a Japanese action flick. Others whispered he was a monk, a ninja, maybe even some undercover agent. But the sharpest minds knew better. There was something else. Who was this man? Why wasn't there any real record of his training? And most of all, what the hell was he waiting for? Red River Penitentiary wasn't just a place where men served time. It was a raw, primitive arena where survival depended less on steel bars and more on the unwritten codes, rules carved out of fear, respect, or brute force. The building itself reflected that truth. Narrow hallways, walls as tall as mountains, guard towers with bored snipers, and correctional officers who avoided eye contact with the inmates. Everyone knew the real law in Red River wasn't enforced by uniforms. It was dictated by the inmates themselves. And nobody understood that better than Frankie "Rat" McGill, a sly Irishman with a cynical grin, small in stature but sharp-tongued. He wasn't strong, not physically dangerous, but he knew every inch of that prison like he'd been born behind its walls. It was Frankie who first approached Kai's cell that afternoon. "Hey, Zen warrior," he said, no sarcasm in his tone. "Want a free piece of advice?" Kai opened his eyes slowly. He didn't answer, just looked at him. "You earned half the block's respect today," Frankie continued, "but you also caught the eye of people you really don't want, including mine." He smirked. Kai studied him for a second. "And what do you want?" "I want to know where you came from, and who sent you. Nobody gets thrown into Red River over a little diner brawl." Kai didn't reply. He just took a slow breath and shut his eyes again. Frankie's grin widened. "Fair enough. We'll talk later, Jedi Master." Over the next few days, the rumors about Kai grew louder. Some said he'd trained with war vets up in Alaska. Others swore he was ex-CIA, burned on a mission gone wrong. The truth, though, was buried deep in the Colorado mountains at an isolated dojo where old-school karate was taught with near-military discipline. Kai Nakamura was the son of Japanese immigrants, raised under an iron discipline. Trained since childhood in martial arts by his father, an American war veteran with the spirit of a sensei. But what had brought him to Red River wasn't honor. It was something that still burned inside him, something unfinished. And there was a reason he had chosen this prison. Someone he had to find. Meanwhile, Brock the Bulldog Malone was slowly recovering in the prison infirmary. Humiliated in front of everyone, his pride bled more than his wounds. But he wasn't stupid. The Bulldog had spent his life breaking men until they bent the knee. But now, for the first time, he'd been beaten, effortlessly, and by someone who hadn't even tried to win. He replayed that moment again and again. It wasn't just strength. It was precision, absolute control of timing, space, and body. And that terrified him more than any shank ever had. "That bastard," he muttered through clenched teeth. Back in the main wing, his crew was divided. Some demanded immediate payback. Others, spooked, wanted to back off. And that's when Malcolm Reverend Banks stepped in. Tall, dark-skinned, calm voice, steady presence. Once a preacher, now serving time for murder, a crime he never confessed, though he wore the weight like he deserved it. Respected by nearly everyone, the one man the Bulldog actually listened to without mocking. "The man who dropped you," Malcolm said quietly, sitting on the edge of Malone's bed. "He's not here by accident. And he hasn't come to destroy you? Not yet." "Not yet?" the Bulldog spat. "He's got purpose in his eyes. He's not some ego-driven punk picking fights. He knows what he's doing. And worse, he knows how to wait." Malone slammed his good hand against the wall. "So what do you suggest?" Malcolm stood, calm as ever. "Find out what he wants, before he takes what he came for." That night, Kai sat in meditation as always. But inside, his mind was burning. He was closer now. The man he was searching for was here. The first step had been taken, but the road ahead would be long. Red River had its own rhythms. In the mess hall, each group had its territory. White supremacists in the right corner, Latinos in the back, black inmates to the left. In the middle sat the unaffiliated, the first ones to get swallowed. Crossing lines was like declaring war, but Kai Nakamura was different. The morning after Brock Bulldog Malone's public humiliation, every eye followed him as he grabbed his tray and sat right in the center of the hall. Alone, silent, eating like it was just another cafeteria. "This dude's crazy," a Latino muttered. "Or he knows exactly what he's doing," a tattooed black inmate replied. The tension climbed, whispers spread. Bets were made on how long he'd last before someone tested him, but no one moved. His silence was louder than any taunt. That afternoon, Bulldog returned to the yard. Bruises still covered his face, but the hate in his eyes burned hotter than ever. He didn't just want revenge on Kai, he needed to reclaim his throne. From now on, he told his crew, anyone who helps the rookie eats through a straw. A message that didn't need repeating. Meanwhile, Kai knew he was being watched, by inmates, by guards, and by someone sharper, a face that hadn't shown itself yet. Frankie Rat McGill noticed something strange. A letter had arrived for Kai through admin, but Kai had no registered family, no lawyer. Frankie tried to intercept it, but by the time he returned, it was gone. Kai had burned it, page by page, with a stolen chapel candle. He knew he was being hunted, but he also knew it wasn't time to strike back. Not yet. On the West Wing, where the heavy hitters were housed, the air was shifting too. A name was whispered through the shadows. Kane Doyle, ex-soldier, mercenary. Locked up for multiple killings, known to take contracts inside, and the name on his list was clear, Kai Nakamura. Word was, a fat payment had been promised. From outside. Nobody knew by who, but the whispers pointed to powerful connections. Which meant Kai wasn't just fighting prison enemies, he'd attracted something far bigger. Meanwhile, Reverend Banks drew closer to Kai. In the prison chapel, where almost no one dared linger, the two men sat in silence. Minutes passed before Malcolm finally spoke. "You know who he is, don't you?" Kai looked at him. "I know who they all are. What matters is what they carry inside." Malcolm nodded. "And what do you carry?" Kai didn't hesitate. "Justice and debt. That was all." Malcolm understood. He stepped back. There was truth in that answer. The next night, as screams echoed faintly in the distance, two men armed with makeshift iron bars broke into Kai's cell. Sent by Malone? Maybe. Sent by Kane Doyle? More likely. But what they found wasn't prey, it was a battlefield. Kai dropped them both without a sound. Sharp moves, precise strikes, light as the wind. Two bodies on the floor before anyone even noticed, but not without cost. Kai's shoulder was cut, shallow but enough to remind him, now it was personal. The next morning, Bulldog was shaken awake by one of his men. It went south. What? They sent two after the rookie. They're in the hospital. One's arm looks like a pretzel, the other doesn't even remember his name. Malone's jaw locked tight. So now he's playing the game. And Kai knew it too. The war had begun, but he had to stay focused. He still hadn't found the man he was after. The real reason, he was in Red River, and time was running out. The prison routine kicked off at 6 a.m. with the blaring alarm and didn't end until 10 p.m. when the lights went out. But for some men inside Red River, time wasn't measured by clocks. It was measured by violence, favors, and the thin ledger of who survived another day. After the nighttime attack, Kai Nakamura slept less. His shoulder still throbbed, but showing weakness was a luxury he couldn't afford. Blood smells like bait in places like this, and weakness here was almost a death sentence. That morning, though, a folded note tucked under his pillow changed everything. H block, level 3, Saturday. He's on the wall. The handwriting was neat, professional, no signature. Kai didn't hesitate. He burned the note in the cell toilet and moved on with the day. But inside he knew, someone knew who he was, and someone wanted to help. Across the yard, Frankie Rat McGill was working his network of lookouts, a half journalist, half fixer for the prison underworld, buying intel with smokes, favors, and thinly veiled threats. He was the one who turned up the name Robert Mendez, a recently booked ex-police captain, convicted for torture, cartel ties, and forced disappearances. The sort of man who hoarded dangerous secrets and made lethal enemies. "You don't think it's convenient he shows up now, warrior?" Rat whispered through the cell bars. "There's no such thing as coincidence," Kai said without lifting his head. Robert Mendez's name had been the last one on Kai's father's list before he vanished. Kai had no proof, only fragments. But now he realized he was close. Meanwhile, the bulldog was rallying his crew. He'd lost respect in some corners. A few guys were even leaning toward Kai for protection. But Brock Malone still had allies. And now Kane Doyle at his side. "I'm not doing the dirty work on that Jap alone," Kane said, scraping a jagged bit of steel on a stone. "But if he gets near Mendez, we lose everything." "Handle it," Malone replied, quietly. The message was clear. Robert Mendez was being guarded by someone with deeper reach than any cell block king. In the chapel, Reverend Banks gathered a small group for meditation and reflection. The room was thinly populated, but Kai started to attend, finding a space where fewer people stared at him like he was a target. "You believe in redemption?" the Reverend asked one day. "I believe in consequence," Kai answered. "Then why are you here?" Kai hesitated, then said, "Because someone must pay for what was taken from me, and because sometimes justice doesn't wear a robe." The Reverend heard the unsaid. This was personal. Saturday arrived. Kai moved like a shadow toward H Block. On level 3, one exterior mess hall wall had an old, flaking mural. But up close, Kai noticed a mark, a black-painted symbol. The same emblem used at his father's dojo up in the mountains. No one inside should have known it. "Unless you waiting on someone, Nakamura?" a voice said behind him. Kai spun, not fast enough. Kane Doyle landed an iron punch into his gut. Kai hit his knees. 2 more men closed in. Kane kicked his face. "I'm sick of this Zen act. You didn't come for justice. You came to die." Something inside Kai snapped. Calm gave way to instinct. He rolled, grabbed Kane's arm, and used the man's momentum to slam him into the marked wall. Kane howled, shoulder slamming into concrete. Guy rose, bloodied, and with 2 clean strikes dropped the other attackers. Kane rose to shaky knees. "Touch Mendez and you'll be dead," Kane spat. "Then why's he still alive?" Kai replied. Kane blinked, confused. "Because he's scared too," Kai said. From that day on, the rhythm of Red River shifted. Tension ratcheted up. Kai's presence became both threat and mystery. And Robert Mendez's name began to travel through whispers, like something you didn't speak aloud for fear it might call down the wrong kind of attention. Someone was shielding the past. Kai knew the wall between him and the truth was starting to crack. For days, the prison felt like a minefield. Kai's steps were tracked, glances met in silence, and guards who'd once looked the other way now watched him more openly. He annoyed them too much, but Kai waited, patiently. He couldn't act on impulse. The target was close, but protected by forces bigger than iron bars. It was Frankie Rat who brought the final piece that unmasked the masks. "I got a copy of Medblock's internal roster," Frankie said, slipping a folded sheet through the bars. "Patient, Robert Mendez. Treatment, hemodialysis twice a week. Transport under level 3 internal escort." Kai looked up. "He's sick?" "Sick and scared. But that ain't all, Sensei. You need to see this." He handed a second, faded page, an old photo. In it, Mendez in uniform stood beside a younger Brock Malone, clean, no tattoos, wearing SWAT gear. "They knew each other," Frankie said. "Worked together for years, before prison, before Malone took the throne." Kai understood then. This prison wasn't just punishment for them, it was a hiding place. The next morning thundered through Red River. Robert Mendez had vanished. No record of escape, no camera footage. No guard reported seeing him leave medical. The man had simply evaporated. Alarms screamed, cells locked down, the yard emptied, Red River stopped. Kai was pulled from his cell and led into an interrogation room. A suit waited, not a prison guard, not a state cop. "You know Robert Mendez?" the agent asked bluntly. "I've heard the name." "Where is he?" Kai stayed silent. The agent leaned in. "Listen. That man's a key piece in a federal probe. If something happens to him and they trace links back to you..." Kai cut him off cold. I'm not the danger here. I'm surrounded by it. The agent stared a beat longer, then rose. If I were you, Nakamura, stop playing Crusader. You'll die chasing something that ain't even yours. That night, Kai's cell was breached again, but not by killers this time. It was Malcolm Reverend Banks. You think he ran on his own? Malcolm asked. Not a chance. He was hidden. Exactly. By someone who wants the story buried before it breathes. Kai pulled a small, worn notebook from under his mattress, pages full of handwritten characters, dates, locations. This is everything I've got, he said. My father wrote names, addresses, a map of corruption. When he disappeared, this was all that was left. The Reverend skimmed and stopped on a line. Mendez, and under it, Brock Malone. Now you see why I ended up here, Kai said. They shoved all the ghosts in one place, like they wanted them away from the world's eyes. Malcolm closed the book gently. Now they know you're here. They'll kill you before you speak. Kai nodded. Which is why I have to move before they do. 3 days later, word leaked through the block. Robert Mendez was alive, but moved into a secret sector inside the prison itself, something called Block Zero for special inmates under federal protection. The catch, nobody knew where Block Zero actually was. It didn't exist on official maps, a prison within the prison. To reach it, Kai would have to do what he'd always avoided, start a war inside Red River. On the east wing, the bulldog Malone knew the noose was tightening. He's digging to the root, Malone said, staring at his cracked infirmary mirror. When he finds it, he'll take us down. What will you do? Kane asked, tense. What I always do. Move faster. In his cell, Kai meditated, but his mind was already on the road ahead. He now knew where the enemy hid. He just needed a way in. And he was ready to break every rule inside Red River to open that door. The disappearance of Robert Mendez split Red River into two invisible camps. On one side were those waiting for chaos, on the other, those preparing to survive it. At the center stood Kai Nakamura, but the quake had only just begun. In the days that followed, the prison wings turned into powder kegs. Groups armed themselves with sharpened utensils, bed frame bars, shards of glass. The guards pretended not to notice. They knew something was coming. The silent war had started. In the yard, the bulldog called a meeting with the faction leaders, Latinos, supremacists, black gangs, and independents. This Jap's digging too deep. If he finds what he's after, none of us are safe. Not even you. He's after justice, not power, one Latino shot back. Justice doesn't exist here, idiot, Brock said flatly. Only survival. And if we let this guy pull down the pillars holding this place up, what's left for us? Silence. Hesitation. I'm offering a deal, Malone continued. Whoever hands over Nakamura, everything else goes back to normal. In Block F, Kai sat in the chapel, where the few who still breathed hope gathered. Reverend Banks approached. They're coming for you. I know. You can still run, Kai. There's time. I have contacts. People who could arrange a transfer, a crack in the system. If I run now, they win. Kai cut him off. This isn't just about me. It's about everything they buried under these walls. My father died for it. I'll live for it. Malcolm closed his eyes for a moment. Then you'll need allies. Men willing to burn for this cause. Kai glanced around. He saw Frankie Rat McGill leaning on the chapel doorway, lost in thought. A young Latino ex-soldier whose brother had vanished under isolated custody. A silent black veteran who had started sitting beside Kai at meals since the first fight. Without trying, Kai had become a symbol, and every step he took now would drag others with him. Meanwhile, Kane Doyle was playing his own game. He knew Bulldog wanted Kai's blood, but Kane had started suspecting Brock was hiding more than he admitted. In a quiet deal with a corrupt guard, Kane uncovered what few knew. Malone's only here because Mendez covered for him. A massacre in 2009, a weapons deal gone sideways. They were both right hands of the same machine. And now they're erasing the trail. and Nakamura's the last dirty page. Kane pocketed the info. He wasn't a man of ethics, but survival had its own compass, which meant the winning side of this war wasn't Malone's anymore. All the while, Kai trained in silence, wounded, watched, but ready, because the next clash wouldn't just be fists, it would be political, psychological, and final. On the fourth night, while the block slept, a whisper came through his bars. "Frankie, I found the entrance to Block 0. Kai opened his eyes. "Under the laundry sector. Access is underground. Almost no one uses it. That's where they keep the ghosts, including your friend Mendez." "When?" "Today. But you'll need a distraction. You'll need time." Kai fixed his gaze on him. "You'd do that for me?" Frankie hesitated, then smirked. "Not for you. But I'm tired of living in this horror show. And maybe, just maybe, the truth's still worth something." The next morning, the alarms blared over a staged escape attempt, cooked up by Frankie with 2 low-level inmates. The perfect diversion. Kai slipped into the laundry, crossed an abandoned corridor, and descended a rusted stairwell into a damp, stinking basement. There it was, the door, Block 0, restricted access. Crossing it changed everything. The Block 0 corridor was unlike anything in Red River. Silent, cold, no sweat, no shouts, no cameras. Just bare concrete walls and digital locks. Kai moved slow, each step echoed like a funeral drum. Here, men weren't living, they were hidden. Pieces of the system, witnesses, traitors, bosses, pawns, all dumped into limbo. At cell 08, there was no name, just a number. Inside sat Robert Mendez, thinner, pale, older. But his eyes still burned with the arrogance of a man who thought himself untouchable. "Nakamura," he said, as if he'd been expecting him. "Thought you'd show sooner." Kai stepped in, locked the door behind him, and stood face to face with the last bridge between him and his father. "Why?" he finally asked. "Because the world's a dirty game, and your old man believed in rules. He trusted you. You ate at our table." Mendez gave a bitter laugh. "Trusting a cop is like handing a match to a kid in a gas station. Your father was a good man, but being good doesn't mean you survive." Kai moved closer. "Did you kill him?" "I gave the order to clear the path, but I didn't pull the trigger." "Who did?" Mendez hesitated. His eyes gave it away. "Malone." Silence. Kai's pulse thundered, but he held still. "He had to wipe every trace," Mendez added. "And now, you're the last. You're sick, weak, hiding. He'll kill you too." "I know." "Then why tell me?" For the first time, Mendez's eyes lost their mask. "Because even rotten men don't want to die lying." Kai left unseen, returned to his block on time. Carried the truth now like a weight pressing into bone. His father's death, the cover-up, the false justice. Every thread led to Brock Malone. But something had shifted in Kai. Once, he would have struck blindly. Now he understood. Vengeance was just the tip of the spear. Justice demanded more than fists. The next morning, inmates awoke to fresh words painted on the yard wall. "The truth lives here, and it's waking up." Nobody knew who wrote it, but everybody knew who it was for. Kai began to train more openly. Not to intimidate, to teach. Small groups formed around him, young men lost in the system, prisoners who, for the first time, saw resistance without becoming monsters. Among them was Elijah Torres, a 22-year-old Latino framed for a robbery he didn't commit. "Why are you helping me?" Elijah asked during a drill. "Because someone has to break the cycle," Kai said, "and because if I die tomorrow, someone has to carry on." Meanwhile, Frankie Rat McGill spread the information Kai uncovered. Hidden notes in shoes, scribbles in books, files smuggled through contraband phones. The Malone Mendez story was bleeding out of the shadows. Up in the tower, the warden reviewed reports with unease. "This Nakamura's stirring up a hornet's nest," he muttered. A federal agent beside him said quietly, "Maybe it's time we let it happen." "What do you mean? You don't see it?" If the system won't clean itself, let one of them do it. Kai knew now. His fight wasn't personal anymore. It was collective, which meant beating Malone couldn't just come from rage. It had to come from something stronger. Truth, but that would come later. For now, the final stage of the plan drew near, and Kai would be ready. Red River wasn't the same anymore. The halls were quieter, the guards more nervous. The inmates split between fear and anticipation. Everyone knew something was about to happen. Kai walked across the yard as if following an invisible line etched in the concrete. Every step was watched with respect, not for what he had done, but for what he was about to do. The message on the wall had thundered through the prison. The truth lives here and it's waking up. To the inmates, it was like cracks forming in the concrete that had pressed down on them for years. To the faction leaders, it was a threat. And to Brock Malone, it was a direct challenge. In the chapel, Malcolm Banks gathered the men who refused to return to the shadows. "If the truth comes out, you know what that means, don't you?" he asked. "War," Elijah answered. "Not just in here, out there too. People will try to silence this prison, shut it down before the world listens." Kai stood silent, watching. Before him, at least 20 men who had sworn never to follow anyone, waited for his word. He took a breath. When it begins, there's no turning back. "When does it begin?" Frankie asked. "Tomorrow, in the mess hall," Kai said without hesitation. Across the prison, Brock Malone sharpened a razor blade, his jaw tight, eyes cold. "He wants me to face him in front of everyone," he sneered. Kane Doyle, standing nearby, hesitated. "You sure that's what you want?" "It's not what I want. It's what he needs. He thinks the truth will break me, but in here strength still decides who breathes. And if you lose, I won't lose." Kai's plan was simple. Expose Malone before everyone. Not just with words, but with action. For weeks, he and Frankie had built a dossier. Documents, recordings, hidden notes with names, dates, crimes. It all tied Malone and Mendez to a web of corruption, torture, and extrajudicial killings, masked as public security. Frankie would leak it to the press the moment the fight began. But Kai knew none of it would matter if he didn't prove with his body what he carried in his soul. The night before the showdown, he wrote a single line on a scrap of paper and handed it to Elijah. "If I fall, finish what we started." Then he knelt on the makeshift yard mat and meditated for hours, unmoving, silent, just as he had on the first day. For the first time, Brock Malone didn't sleep either, not out of fear, but contained fury. He had built Red River's kingdom with his fists. Now a rookie, a calm-eyed monk, dared to destroy it with truth and discipline. Unacceptable. At noon sharp, the mess hall was packed. Guards lined the walls. Inmates from every block filled the tables. And in the center, a strange emptiness. A space held open, as if everyone was waiting. Kai walked in alone, stepped into the center, stood still, waiting. Malone entered seconds later, surrounded, but truly alone. The two men locked eyes, no words. Somewhere, a nervous inmate dropped a tray. The clang was the spark. The final showdown was about to begin. The silence in the hall was suffocating. More than 200 men watched the empty space between Kai Nakamura and Brock Bulldog Malone, two worlds colliding, one built on fear, force, and domination, the other on discipline, justice, and purpose. Kai stood tall, feet rooted, eyes calm. Malone stalked like a bull ready to charge, muscles tense, jaw clenched. "Think you're gonna play hero in here?" Malone growled. "This ain't no movie. There's no happy ending." "I'm not looking for a happy ending," Kai said quietly. "I'm looking for the end of the lie." Malone lunged, fast, brutal. A fist aimed at Kai's face, but it hit nothing. Kai flowed aside like water, spinning smoothly, landing a precise low kick that staggered the giant. Malone stumbled, but stayed upright. "Fight me straight, you bastard," he roared. He came again. 2 punches, a kick, a savage rush. Kai blocked, deflected, stepped back with precision. He wasn't trying to overpower. He was letting Malone expose himself. Every wild swing, every scream, every desperate move before the eyes of the crowd showed the truth. The so-called king was just a broken man raging against his fall. Then Malone caught him, grabbed his collar, slammed him against the wall, pounded his stomach. Kai gasped for air. The bulldog lifted him, shouting, "You don't know who you're messing with. I made this prison kneel." And then the reversal came. From the second floor, one of the guards, pressured by Frankie and the Reverend, flipped the PA system. A recording blasted across every block. Date 2009, Operation Phoenix details, unregistered executions, stolen weapons, names involved. Let Robert Mendez, Officer Brock Malone. Their own voices, Malone and Mendez. Pulled from a hidden wiretap Frankie had dug out through the Reverend's contacts. Each word was a hammer blow to Malone's reputation. He froze, shook. Kai seized the opening, drove a sharp strike into his solar plexus. Malone staggered back, choking. "They heard you," Kai said through clenched breath. "All of them." Malone looked around. The faces that once feared him now judged him. "It's a lie," he screamed. "All of it. I'm the one who keeps this place standing." Kai stepped forward, calm, stopping just a meter away. "Then fight, Malone. Not for fear, not for control. Fight for the truth. If it's still yours." For a heartbeat, Malone faltered, then roared, charging for the final strike. Kai didn't hesitate. He pivoted, spun, and unleashed a perfect back kick, a Ushiro Jerry, straight to Malone's jaw. The bulldog crumbled, collapsed like a statue, shattering. Silence. And then a tray clattered to the floor, followed by applause, low, hesitant, but real. Malone didn't rise. His reign ended there. From the tower above, federal agents watched. "Think this changes anything?" the warden asked. "Changes enough," the agent replied. "What that man just did here, it's already beyond these walls." In the infirmary, Malone was taken away without a fight. No screams, no threats. In the halls, inmates stepped aside for Kai, not seeing him as a boss, not even a hero, but as the man who had finally broken the lie. In the yard, Malcolm Banks approached. "You did what had to be done." Kai looked up at the sky. "I did what needed to be done." "And now?" Kai drew in a long breath. "Now, they decide what to do with the truth." The news spread faster than the system could erase it. Within hours, journalists outside Red River Penitentiary began receiving anonymous dossiers, documents, recordings, testimonies. Everything Frankie, Rat McGill, and Reverend Banks had prepared with Kai. The truth was finally out. Brock Malone's name splashed across headlines nationwide. His old story, once painted as a hero cop imprisoned for excessive force, was exposed as a web of corruption, killings, and cover-ups. Red River became a symbol. The federal government announced a full internal investigation, and the so-called Block Zero was dismantled. Outside agents temporarily took control of the prison. Robert Mendez, faced with the firestorm, agreed to cooperate in exchange for protection. His testimony confirmed everything Kai had exposed. He would never see daylight again. But the truth would outlive him. And what about Kai Nakamura? He wasn't released, but he wasn't forgotten either. His record was re-evaluated, his sentence reduced, and more importantly, he was no longer seen as just a number, but as the man who shook the system from the inside. On his last night before being transferred to another facility, less hostile, more open, Kai sat quietly in the yard. Frankie walked up. "Gonna miss you, Sensei," he said. "Funny thing to say about a guy who showed up dropping people." Kai gave the faintest smile. "You never really know who needs to fall, until the truth knocks them down." Rat chuckled. "Philosophical to the end." At dawn, when the transport van carried him away, no one cheered his departure. But no one looked away either. Every gaze followed him, some with respect, others with hope, but none with fear. Kai Nakamura had walked in alone, but he left a symbol, and Red River would never be the same. Months later, in a small mountain village in Colorado, a dojo reopened its doors. There, among snow-capped peaks, a man with scarred fists and calm eyes taught lost youth what the streets never had: balance. His name was Kai. He never spoke of the past. But sometimes, he'd stare at the horizon like he still heard echoes of chains and screams. And when asked why he taught, he simply replied, "Because one day, someone's gonna need to know how to defend themselves." And then he returned to silence. In a world where silence too often hides injustice, Kai Nakamura chose to act, not for revenge, but for truth. This story isn't just about fights inside prison walls. It's about moral courage, about breaking cycles, about doing what's right, even when everything tells you not to. Now we want to hear from you. What did you think of Kai's journey? Would you have done the same in his place? Share your thoughts. Send this story to someone who needs inspiration. And remember, truth also needs defenders.